Belgian government mulling plans to buy back Leopard 1 tanks, sold years ago to private firm, to send to Ukraine, but asks for a reasonable price. German-made Leopard 1 tanks, which were removed from the Belgian army's inventory years ago and sold to a defense industry firm, is back on the government's agenda. Officials are mulling plans to buy back the tanks from the company at a reasonable price to send to Ukraine. About a decade ago, the Belgian army decided not to use tracked heavy tanks anymore, retiring the Leopard 1 models as they were not operational, after which they were transferred to the Belgian defense industry company known now as OIP Land Systems. Western nations stepped up their aid to Ukraine when the war with Russia broke out on February 24, 2022, with many recently pledging to send Kyiv dozens of main battle tanks. The Belgian government plans to do the same but first needs to purchase back the Leopard 1 tanks that are now the property of OIP Land Systems. Belgian Defense Minister Ludovine de Donder told broadcaster Bell RTL that OIP Land Systems had bought the tanks a few years ago for around €10,000 to €15,000, about $10,900 to $16,400, each, and now wants to sell them at exorbitant profits. De Donder said there was nothing to prevent us from taking them back, but added that they were no longer in working order. The company is no position to try to sell them at unreasonable prices, he added. Challenging this account, the CEO of OIP Land Systems Freddy Versluys told Anadolu that he was wrongfully portrayed as a greedy arms dealer. Speaking at a hangar in the western Tournai area, Versluys confirmed that his company was currently in talks with the government, but refrained from providing further details. He said maintaining the military hangars costed €2.5 million per year and added that further money was needed to modernize the tanks. All these came at high costs, he continued. Noting that about 400 military vehicles, some of which were tracked heavy tanks, had been waiting for years in storage, the CEO said the company could re-operate half of these to be used in combat in Ukraine. Versluys also underlined the need for export permits and international cooperation to quickly prepare the tanks for shipment as his company lacked that level of industrial capacity. The outskirts of Tournai, a sleepy medieval town in the gentle, Bruegelian landscape of the French-speaking part of Belgium, there is an unassuming grey hangar, barely hidden behind a fence. Inside are rows upon rows of German-made Leopard 1 tanks and other heavy fighting vehicles, some of the same types of weapons that top Ukraine's military wish list. The hangar belongs to the Belgium defense company OIP and contains one of the biggest privately owned reserves of weapons in Europe. Many of these tanks have been sitting here for years. Hopefully, now it is the time they finally see some action in Ukraine, said Freddy Versluys, the head of OIP, as he toured the hangar. Here we have the 50 Leopard 1s, he said, pointing. We also have 38 German Gepard tanks, 112 Austrian SK-105 light tanks, and 100 Italian VCC-2 and 70 M113 armor carriers. In total, his firm has about 500 armored vehicles in stock, probably the widest private arsenal of tanks in Europe, according to Versluys, who has a long history in the military sector. After completing his military service, Versluys spent 9 years working for the Belgian army in a division that was responsible for the quality control of tanks and ammunition. In 1989 he joined OIP, a firm that specialized in optical equipment, where he eventually set up OIP Land Systems, a subsidiary company that bought up old military equipment, banking that one day there would be a demand for it again. Everything we do is legal here, we go by the books and have all the licenses needed, he said, shrugging at the arms dealer label. Walking Tournai's narrow, cobblestone back streets and boulevards, it is hard to imagine that such weapons are only a 15-minute walk away. Versluys bought up most of his current stock over the last 2 decades, acquiring the tanks directly from European governments cutting their defense spending. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, European nations have sought to replace some of the heavy and costly to maintain Cold War-era tanks with the lighter vehicles needed for shorter peacekeeping missions around the world. The defense cuts were accelerated by the 2008 economic crisis, and by 2014, the year Vladimir Putin annexed Crimea, European military spending had reached a historic low. In one of Versluys' bigger deals, he bought 50 Leopard 1 tanks that the Belgian government decommissioned in 2014 for €37,000 each, about £29,600. It was the market price because of the geopolitical situation at the time, he said. But buying those decommissioned tanks was a massive gamble for us. A big risk. The Leopard 1, which is from the 1960s, is lighter and less powerful than the newer Leopard 2 tanks, 14 of which Germany agreed last week to send to Ukraine, but German officials have said they would still be able to compete with a Russian battle tank. For years, Versailles was unable to sell the Leopard 1s and Gepards as German law requires approval from Berlin for the re-export of its military equipment. But the Chancellor Olaf Scholz's decision last week on the Leopard 2s, which opened the floodgates for other European countries to follow suit, has opened up new possibilities. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the subsequent unprecedented Western military support to Kyiv, had already led Versailles to sell 46 M113 light armored vehicles to the UK, which then transferred them to Ukraine, part of a military package. Belgium, which has no tanks left in its defense stock, has explored the possibility of buying back the Leopard 1s it sold to Versailles. Ludovine de Donder, Belgium's Minister of Defense, last week said it had opened talks with OIP but accused the firm of trying to make a huge profit from the sale. The talks are still on, but I'm not going to pay $500,000 for a tank that's nowhere near combat ready, de Donder told Belgian media. Versailles denied that the Belgian government had approached him, and said it was hard to estimate the price for which he would sell the tanks. There is no point talking about prices right now because we need to check the condition of each tank and what needs to be updated, he said. He stressed that it could take months and up to €1 million in renovation costs for each tank to get them ready for use in Ukraine. These guys need a new engine, shock absorbers, the latest radar technology, the list goes on.